What would you do if the ticket in your hand paid for, reserved, and rightfully yours was ripped apart in front of a cabin full of strangers? What if the person tearing it wasn't a random passenger, but a flight attendant who looked you in the eye and decided you didn't belong in first class? And what if, after being humiliated and even slapped, you revealed a truth that froze everyone in their seats? You weren't just a passenger. You were the CEO of the very airline they worked for. This is the story of Amara Johnson, a woman who carried herself with quiet strength while the world tried to strip her of dignity at 30,000 feet. It's about silence, complicity, and the moment when truth becomes too powerful to ignore. As you listen, ask yourself, how many times has dignity been dismissed in plain sight? How many people suffer in silence without the power to fight back? Stay with me until the end, because this story is not just about humiliation, it's about transformation, accountability, and the fire of dignity that can never be stolen. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss stories that matter. The airport had the usual hum of controlled chaos. Travelers wheeled their bags briskly down the concourse. Flight announcements echoed from overhead speakers, and the smell of coffee and reheated food lingered in the air. Gate C-18 was no different, though the mood there carried an extra edge of anticipation. It was the late afternoon non-stop from Los Angeles to New York, a transcontinental flight packed with executives, lawyers, and tired families hurrying to make it home before nightfall. Amara Johnson stood quietly near the gate, one hand resting on the strap of her worn leather satchel. She blended into the scene so well that no one gave her more than a passing glance. Her dark jeans were simple, her white blouse slightly creased, and her sneakers showed the wear of many long trips. Nothing about her suggested wealth or power. That was the way she liked it. For 3 years she had been traveling incognito, boarding flights in plain clothes, listening, observing, taking note of how her company treated the very people who paid for its existence. To everyone around her, she looked like an ordinary traveler, perhaps even a weary one. But beneath that unassuming exterior was the mind of a woman who had quietly become one of the most influential figures in the aviation industry. As Chief Executive Officer of Aurora Air and one of its largest shareholders, she had every right to stand at the front of the first-class boarding line. Yet here, dressed without pretense, she was seen only for what people chose to assume. The boarding process began, and the crowd surged toward the gate. Amara moved calmly forward, handing her ticket to the gate agent, who scanned it with a perfunctory beep. Seat 2A, printed in bold letters, flashed across the screen. The agent smiled politely and waved her on. Inside the jet bridge, the air grew warmer, thicker, filled with that familiar scent of aviation fuel and recycled air. The line moved steadily until Amara stepped into the wide doorway of the aircraft. There, waiting like a sentinel, stood Carla Monroe, the senior flight attendant. Carla was tall, with sharp features and a smile that rarely reached her eyes. She scanned boarding passes as if they were evidence in a trial. "Good afternoon," Carla said automatically, though her gaze lingered on Amara's clothes. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing with quick judgment. "Boarding pass. Please." Amara handed it over without a word. Carla glanced at it, then back at Amara. Her lips tightened. "First class?" she asked, disbelief dripping from her voice. "Yes," Amara replied evenly. "Seat 2A." Carla hesitated for a fraction of a second, then forced a professional smile. "Very well. straight ahead to your left, but the stiffness in her tone carried more than simple instruction, it carried skepticism, a subtle accusation wrapped in courtesy. Amara walked down the aisle, her steps steady. The first-class cabin glowed softly with warm lighting, its wide leather seats already filling with passengers settling into their own small worlds. A businessman flipped through spreadsheets on a tablet. A young woman in designer sunglasses took selfies, careful to catch the champagne flute on her tray. In seat 1B, Naomi Carter, a lifestyle influencer with 1 million followers, had her phone out, live streaming the glamour of first-class travel. Amara placed her bag carefully in the overhead bin and sat in 2A. She drew in a quiet breath, feeling the cool leather beneath her. This was routine for her, but she also knew it was never truly routine. Each flight held the possibility of seeing something revealing something that showed the true culture of the airline. She wasn't just here to travel, she was here to witness. Carla appeared moments later, her expression strained. She leaned close, her voice pitched low but sharp. "Ma'am, I think you're in the wrong seat. Economy is further back." Amara met her eyes calmly. "This is my assigned seat." 2A. Carla's jaw clenched. She snatched the ticket stub from Amara's tray table and studied it with exaggerated care. Then, with a smile that looked more like a sneer, she said, "We'll see about that." She walked briskly to the front, whispering something to Stephen Clark, the purser. He looked back at Amara, his face twisted in disapproval, as if her very presence disturbed the order of the cabin. Passengers noticed the exchange. A man in a gray suit muttered, "Probably tried to sneak up here." His wife clutched her handbag closer and whispered, "Unbelievable. These people think they can just take what isn't theirs." Their words weren't meant for Amara's ears, but she heard them clearly. She felt the sting, though her expression remained calm. Naomi Carter caught the tension instantly. She angled her phone slightly, whispering for her audience, "Drama in first class already. Someone's in a seat that doesn't belong to them." Her viewer count ticked upward as comments began streaming in. Some laughed, some jeered, some cheered on the idea of catching a scammer in the act. Amara folded her hands in her lap, her eyes steady. She had lived this before in boardrooms, in restaurants, even on the sidewalks of cities where she owned entire office towers. Prejudice came dressed in many uniforms, and today it wore the polished navy of an airline crew. Carla returned with Stephen beside her. His voice was firm, practiced from years of asserting control. "Ma'am, we'll need to see your government-issued identification immediately." Amara lifted her chin slightly. "Of course, but I'd like to know why you're asking me specifically." Stephen's eyes flickered with irritation. "Because this is first class, and we've had issues before. Have you asked anyone else for identification?" His silence was answer enough. Passengers shifted in their seats, sensing the confrontation. Some pulled out phones, recording discreetly. Naomi whispered into her live stream, "She's refusing to cooperate." "Oh, this is getting good." Amara reached into her satchel slowly, deliberately, her movements careful. She could feel eyes watching, waiting for a misstep. As her fingers brushed against the smooth leather of her portfolio, she paused. Should she reveal who she was now? End this quickly, or should she wait? Let the truth unfold at the exact moment it would matter most. Her heart beat steadily, but beneath it lay the weight of years of experience. She had been judged before. She had been underestimated before. and each time she had chosen patience over fury, clarity over chaos. This moment would be no different. She withdrew her ID and handed it to Stephen. He inspected it, his brows knitting as though even official government proof could not convince him. He glanced at Carla, who gave a tiny nod of satisfaction. "We'll need to verify this," Stephen said, his tone final. "Until then, you'll need to step out of the seat." Amara's lips curved in the faintest of smiles. She leaned back slightly, her voice calm, steady, almost soothing. "I think you'll find that I belong exactly where I am." The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Naomi's stream spiked to 2,000 viewers. Carla's eyes glittered with something between triumph and anger. And Amara, still, sat with the serenity of someone who knew the storm was only beginning. The seatbelt signs were still dimmed and the hum of boarding filled the cabin. A steady stream of passengers walked past first class toward economy, dragging their roller bags with practiced exhaustion. But inside the quiet cocoon of the forward cabin, all attention seemed drawn to one woman in seat 2A. Amara Johnson sat upright, her posture calm but unmistakably firm. Her boarding stub had already been taken, her identification had been inspected longer than necessary, and yet suspicion lingered in the air, thick as turbulence before a storm. Carla Monroe leaned against the bulkhead, arms folded, watching Amara with narrowed eyes. She was not subtle about it. The glance was appraising, condescending, as if she were waiting for Amara to admit she had made some kind of mistake. Stephen Clark, the purser, stood beside her. His gray uniform was crisp, his tie knotted too tightly, his posture the stance of authority. He whispered something into Carla's ear, and though his words were low, Amara caught fragments. Not usual, doesn't fit. Passengers nearby began to murmur. The businessman in 2B glanced sideways, then shook his head, muttering under his breath. The woman in 3A leaned toward her husband and whispered just loudly enough for Amara to hear. "She doesn't belong up here. Probably slipped through with the wrong ticket." Amara heard every syllable. Years of practice taught her how to let such words pass over her, but that did not mean they failed to wound. Inside, she felt the familiar churn of indignation. She thought of her mother, who once stood at the back of a Greyhound bus clutching her hand, whispering, "It's only a few hours. Baby, just keep quiet." That memory rose now, unbidden, pressing against her chest. She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying her breath. She would not shrink. She would not move. Naomi Carter had shifted her phone toward Amara. Her live stream audience had swelled in minutes, the comments scrolling by faster than she could read. Some egged her on "Get closer." "We want to see the drama." Others mocked Amara without knowing her name. "She's faking it. Guarantee she forged that ticket. Bet she can't even spell first class." Naomi bit her lip to hide a grin. Controversy was currency, and right now her audience balance was climbing. Stephen cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said with the slow patience of someone who believed himself above reproach, "this is your last chance to cooperate. We can reassign you to a seat in the rear cabin while we verify. That would avoid unnecessary conflict." Amara tilted her head, her eyes unwavering. "Unnecessary conflict," she repeated softly, almost to herself. Then she looked directly at him. "The only conflict here is the one you've chosen to create." The businessman in 2B chuckled dismissively. "You heard the man. Just move." "Lady, stop holding everyone up," Naomi whispered to her viewers. "This is wild. She's refusing. Can you believe this? The stream chat filled with emojis and laughter. Carla stepped forward, her voice sharpened to a blade. You will need to vacate this seat right now. Otherwise, we'll have no choice but to involve security. This is not a debate. Amara's heart thudded once, hard, but her face betrayed nothing. She was weighing her choices with the precision of a surgeon. Reveal who she was now and silence them all, or allow their arrogance to dig deeper, expose itself so completely that the truth, when revealed, would leave no room for doubt. She chose the latter. She placed her hands neatly on her lap, her voice calm, even melodic. I'm not moving. This is my assigned seat. Until you can prove otherwise, I'll remain right here. Carla's nostrils flared. She turned to Stephen. Call the captain, she snapped. Stephen hesitated. He was a man who liked order, and calling the captain meant admitting the cabin was already out of control. But Carla's glare was insistent. He pulled the handset from its cradle and spoke in clipped tones. Captain Reed, we need your presence in first class. Immediate? A ripple of anticipation passed through the cabin. Passengers leaned forward. Some pulled out phones more openly now. Naomi whispered into hers, Guys, the captain is coming. This is next-level crazy. Amara sat still, her palms pressed lightly against her knees, grounding herself. She remembered her father's words spoken decades earlier, words he had repeated every time she encountered cruelty. Never let them see you break. Dignity is your armor. It cannot be taken unless you surrender it. She whispered those words to herself now, inaudible beneath the buzz of conversation. Minutes later, Captain Thomas Reed entered. He was tall, weathered from years in the cockpit, with a manner that suggested efficiency mattered more than empathy. He glanced quickly between Carla, Stephen, and Amara. His frown deepened. What's the issue? His voice was clipped, practiced. Carla jumped to answer first. Passenger in 2A refuses to move. We believe her ticket may be invalid. Amara opened her mouth, but Reed held up a hand. I don't want excuses. I want solutions. We are 10 minutes from scheduled pushback. I need this resolved now. Stephen pointed toward Amara. Sir, we've asked her to relocate while we verify. She refuses. The captain turned his gaze on Amara. Ma'am, for the sake of everyone on this flight, please comply. Move to economy until we can sort this out. The air seemed to thicken. Dozens of eyes locked on her, waiting for her compliance or her outburst. Inside, Amara felt the swell of 1,000 unspoken arguments, 1,000 memories of being told to wait, to move aside, to settle later. She thought of the countless times she had let things slide for the sake of peace. She thought of the boardrooms where she had smiled through condescension, the deals where she had bitten her tongue rather than expose ignorance too sharply. Her breath caught in her chest. Should she relent just this once, to avoid the spectacle, the voice inside her whispered the temptation of silence. But another voice, stronger, surged upward, the voice that had carried her from obscurity to the highest office of the airline. The voice that knew peace without justice was not peace at all. She looked the captain squarely in the eye. Her words were steady, resolute. I will not move. This is my seat. The captain's brow furrowed. Ma'am, if you don't comply, you may be removed from this aircraft. I don't want it to come to that, Naomi whispered into her phone, barely containing her excitement. Oh my God, she's defying the captain. This is insane. Stay tuned. You guys. Carla folded her arms with satisfaction, as if victory were imminent. Stephen tapped the handset nervously, ready to summon airport security. The businessman in 2B shook his head and muttered, "Unbelievable." Amara's pulse beat steady now. Her decision made, she would endure whatever storm they summoned. For she knew something none of them yet understood. She knew she was not simply a passenger. She was the storm. The tension thickened, unrelieved, until every sound, the buzz of electronics, the clink of a glass, the shuffle of shoes seemed amplified. The cabin was no longer just a place of travel. It was a stage, and every person aboard was both actor and witness to a truth that was about to be laid bare. The murmur of passengers had grown into a low chorus. Every seat in the first-class cabin seemed angled toward Amara Johnson, as though she were a spectacle instead of a customer. Even the curtain separating business from first had been drawn back slightly by curious eyes peeking in. It was no longer just a dispute about a seat. It was a trial, and the jury was restless. Carla Monroe, emboldened by the captain's thin patience, stepped forward again. Her polished shoes clicked against the carpet as she stopped directly in front of Amara. "You've had more than enough chances," she said, her voice loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "If you won't move willingly, we'll take further measures." Stephen Clark loomed beside her, his expression the picture of self-importance. "Hand me your boarding stub again," he demanded. Amara's voice was calm, almost gentle. "You already tore part of it, but here's what's left." She handed over the torn slip with steady hands. Carla held it up between her fingers, studied it for a moment, then, with a theatrical sigh, she ripped it again. The paper tearing in half with a sharp crack, gasps erupted from the surrounding passengers. The sound was small, but its meaning was immense. "This is useless now," Carla declared. "It looks forged to me. Probably a fake ticket. You'll have to leave this seat." Naomi Carter's phone was angled perfectly. Her live stream audience exploded with reactions. The chat scrolled faster than her eyes could follow. She ripped the ticket. "Yo, this is crazy. Kick her off." "No way this is real life," Naomi whispered. "I'm telling you guys, this is unbelievable. She's actually destroying her pass." The businessman in 2B smirked and said loudly, "I knew it. She doesn't belong here. People like her always try to game the system." His wife tittered beside him, clutching her designer scarf as though Amara might somehow steal that too. Carla leaned closer, her perfume sharp, her tone dripping with disdain. "This is your last chance to get up on your own. Otherwise, security will be called." Amara remained perfectly still, her gaze steady, though inside her chest, a storm was building. Every instinct screamed to rise, to shout, to unleash years of swallowed fury. But she knew the spectacle would serve no one. Her dignity was her weapon, and so she stayed seated, a quiet defiance radiating from her stillness. Carla's eyes flashed. With a swift motion that caught the entire cabin by surprise, she slapped Amara across the cheek. The crack of skin meeting skin echoed like a gunshot. The cabin gasped collectively. A flight attendant striking a passenger, such a breach of every rule, every code, yet it had just happened. Witnessed by dozens, recorded by phones, streamed live to thousands. Amara's head turned slightly from the force, her cheek stinging, the warmth of the slap blooming across her skin. For a long, heavy moment, she said nothing. She simply inhaled slowly, blinked once, and returned her gaze to Carla with a calm so profound it unsettled even her attacker. Naomi's voice trembled with shock, though her excitement laced through every word. Oh my God, she just slapped her. You guys saw that. Right. Tell me you saw that. Her comment section detonated. People demanded the video be clipped, shared, spread across every platform. The incident was already viral, its trajectory unstoppable. Carla, realizing too late the gravity of what she had done, tried to mask her panic with arrogance. See, this kind of defiance forces us to act. She left us no choice. Amara finally spoke, her voice low, steady, cutting through the murmurs like steel through cloth. No choice. You always had a choice, and you chose cruelty. Her words hung in the air. For the first time, silence crept over the passengers. Even the businessman beside her shifted uncomfortably, his smirk fading as if he realized he had sided with something irredeemable. Stephen cleared his throat, desperate to reassert authority. We'll call Officer Alvarez now. You will be escorted off this plane immediately. The captain, still at the front of the cabin, rubbed his forehead in frustration. His priority was the schedule, but even he knew a line had been crossed, yet his words betrayed his priorities. Just handle it quickly. We need to depart. Amara sat unmoving, her hands folded in her lap. The sting on her cheek pulsed with every heartbeat, but her eyes remained tranquil. Inside, however, her thoughts raced. She debated the moment of revelation. Should she reveal who she truly was right now? Stop this madness in its tracks, or should she let them pile indignity upon indignity until their cruelty was undeniable? Her inner voice whispered caution. Wait. Let them show the world who they are. Let them make the truth unmistakable. Naomi leaned closer, her phone angled carefully. She whispered for her viewers. She's just sitting there. She's not even fighting back. This is insane. I can't believe what I'm seeing. Her audience count surged again. Tens of thousands now, the incident spiraling far beyond the confines of this cabin. Carla snapped her fingers at Stephen. Call him now. Stephen lifted the interphone and spoke tersely. Moments later, the forward door reopened and Officer Miguel Alvarez stepped in. He was young, with steady eyes and a firm stance, his badge catching the light. He glanced from Carla to Amara, then to the torn ticket in Carla's hand. What's going on here? He asked, his voice carrying the weight of authority. Carla wasted no time. This passenger is refusing to leave a seat that isn't hers. She presented suspicious documentation and became disruptive. I was forced to intervene. Amara looked directly at Officer Alvarez, her voice soft but resolute. Everything she just said is a lie. My boarding pass was valid until she tore it apart, and I have done nothing but sit in the seat assigned to me. The officer frowned. His gaze lingered on the red mark across Amara's cheek. He looked back at Carla, suspicion creeping into his expression. Passengers began to mutter louder now. Someone in row 3 said, I saw her rip the ticket. Another added, she slapped her. We all saw it. Phones were raised higher, recording every angle. Naomi whispered into her live stream. Even the cop is hesitating. You guys, this is going to explode online. Look at that mark on her face. Amara felt the weight of dozens of eyes, the sting of injustice, the pull of 1,000 unspoken battles. Inside. She weighed her next step carefully. She could remain silent, let the chaos unfold, or she could begin to peel back the veil of her identity. Her fingers brushed against her leather folio in her satchel. and she felt the edges of documents that could end this charade instantly. But again, her inner voice whispered patience. Not yet. Officer Alvarez straightened. "Captain, what do you want me to do?" Thomas Reed sighed heavily. "We don't have time for this. Remove her if she won't move voluntarily. We're already behind schedule." The order was clear, but the air inside the cabin was no longer on Carla's side. Passengers had seen too much, phones captured too much. The truth was no longer buried, it was boiling to the surface. Amara inhaled deeply, her composure unshaken, her dignity intact despite the humiliation. She whispered to herself once more, a mantra as old as her childhood dignity cannot be taken unless you surrender it. And she had no intention of surrendering. The cabin lights glowed softly, but the tension in the air was raw and cutting. Amara Johnson sat perfectly still in seat 2A, her back straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The sting on her cheek from Carla Monroe's slap lingered, a reminder of the cruelty that had just unfolded. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some whispering, others holding their phones higher, catching every angle of the unfolding storm. Officer Miguel Alvarez stood at the edge of the aisle, his hand resting lightly near the clasp of his belt. His eyes flickered from Amara to Carla, then back again. He had seen conflict on planes before, but rarely had it carried this charge, this unmistakable undercurrent of something more than a seat dispute. "Captain Reed," Alvarez said carefully, "we might need to slow this down. There are a lot of witnesses. Some are saying they saw her ticket destroyed. Some are saying there was physical contact." The captain pinched the bridge of his nose. He was a man who measured time in departure slots and landing slots, not in human dignity. "Officer, my priority is getting this aircraft off the ground. We can sort the rest later. For now, if she will not comply, she needs to be removed." Stephen Clark nodded quickly, as if grateful for the captain's support. "Exactly. We cannot let one disruptive passenger jeopardize the schedule. It sets a bad precedent." Amara turned her head slowly, her eyes locking on Stephen. Her voice was quiet but firm, each word delivered with a weight that silenced those nearby. "The only precedent being set here is that cruelty can masquerade as order, and you are choosing to be its messengers. For the first time." Stephen's eyes wavered. Carla, however, smirked, convinced victory was close. "Enough of this," she snapped. "Officer, do your job." Alvarez hesitated. He looked again at Amara, at the unbroken calm radiating from her even in humiliation. He saw the red mark on her cheek, a mark no airline code of conduct could justify. Something in him stirred, a quiet conflict between following orders and honoring truth. Amara studied him in return. She saw the hesitation, the flicker of humanity behind the badge. For a fleeting moment, she wondered if he would choose courage over compliance. Naomi Carter whispered into her phone, her voice trembling with excitement. The officers hesitating. "You guys, this is insane. The captain wants her off. The crew wants her off. But she's just sitting there, calm as ever. Look at her face. She's not even flinching." Her audience count surged past 50,000. The comments were a storm of outrage and disbelief. Amara felt the pull of memory again. She thought of her father, who once stood outside a courthouse, denied entry because of the color of his skin, and how he had walked home that day with quiet dignity, refusing to let hate see him bow. She thought of her mother's words, whispered in long nights, "They can bruise you, but they cannot own you." And she thought of her own rise through boardrooms filled with men who doubted her, dismissed her, underestimated her. Every scar of her journey converged in this moment. Carla took a step closer. Her voice was sharp, theatrical for the passengers watching. "Ma'am, this is your last warning. Get up and walk to economy, or you'll be escorted out of here in handcuffs." Amara's lips curved into the faintest smile. It was not amusement, but something deeper. A recognition of the absurdity, the tragedy of what was unfolding. Her voice was soft, almost soothing, but it carried to every corner of the cabin. "You may try to humiliate me. You may try to strip me of dignity in front of these strangers, but the truth does not bend to your arrogance. It waits, patient and undeniable, and soon it will speak louder than all of you." The businessman in 2B scoffed. "What truth, that you scammed your way into first class? Please, just spare us." A woman 2 rows back raised her voice suddenly. "I saw her ticket. It was valid. That woman destroyed it." The cabin erupted in murmurs. Another voice joined in. "She hit her. I got it on video." Several phones rose higher, passengers emboldened. Carla's face flushed. She turned sharply toward the woman. "Stay out of this. This is official crew business." The cabin was slipping from her control, and she knew it. Captain Reed's patience thinned to nothing. His voice cut through the noise, hard and final. "Officer Alvarez, remove her now. That's an order." The officer straightened. Orders were orders. But his eyes lingered on Amara, as though silently apologizing for what he was about to do. Amara's heart pounded once, hard, but her face remained calm. She'd waited long enough. The humiliation had been recorded, witnessed, shared across the world already. The cruelty was undeniable. Now, perhaps, it was time to reveal the truth. Her hand drifted toward her satchel, fingers brushing the edge of the leather folio inside. In that folio were documents, identification, proof that could turn this entire spectacle on its head. But still she hesitated, not out of fear, but strategy. Timing was everything. The truth revealed too soon would seem like a trick. The truth revealed after undeniable injustice would become a reckoning. Naomi whispered breathlessly into her phone. "She's reaching into her bag. Oh my God, what's happening, you guys? Stay tuned, don't leave the stream." Amara paused, her fingers resting on the folio, then withdrew her hand empty. Not yet. She would let them dig the hole deeper. She would let their arrogance bury them. Alvarez stepped forward reluctantly. "Ma'am, please, I don't want to do this, but if you don't comply, I'll have to escort you out." Amara looked up at him, her eyes soft but unwavering. "I know you don't want this, and one day you'll remember this moment, and you'll wish you had chosen differently. But for now, do what you believe you must. I will remain seated." The officer hesitated, torn between duty and conscience. The passengers leaned in, phones glowing, hearts pounding. The air inside the cabin seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the storm to break. And in the center of it all, Amara Johnson sat like a stone in a river, unmovable, unbroken, her dignity a quiet defiance that no slap, no torn ticket, no threat could erase. The silence that filled the cabin was almost unbearable. Officer Miguel Alvarez stood over Amara Johnson, his hand hovering near her shoulder as though preparing to escort her away. The passengers leaned forward in their wide leather seats, their phones raised high, capturing every second. The tension was so sharp that even the soft hum of the aircraft system seemed loud. Amara sat perfectly still, her hands folded on her lap. The sting on her cheek from Carla Monroe's slap pulsed like a drumbeat. Yet her eyes were calm, her breathing measured. She could feel the weight of history pressing against her chest, the countless moments when dignity had been stripped from people who looked like her. She remembered her father's trembling voice after being turned away from a job interview, her mother's stoic silence after being ignored at a hospital desk. She had grown up in a world that demanded silence from people like her, but silence had never brought justice. Carla shifted impatiently. "Officer, do it now. She's disrupting the entire flight." Her voice was shrill, almost desperate, though she masked it with false authority. Stephen Clark crossed his arms, nodding in agreement. "We've been more than patient. This can't continue." Captain Thomas Reed, still by the galley, checked his watch with exasperation. "We've wasted too much time already. Get her off the plane." His words landed like cold steel. Alvarez looked again at Amara. Her eyes met his with quiet intensity, a gaze that seemed to pierce through the uniform, the badge, the protocol. She spoke softly, her voice steady but carrying enough weight to silence the whispers. "Be careful what you choose. Officer, every action taken here is being watched, recorded, remembered, not just by these passengers, not just by the thousands watching online, but by people who hold your future in their hands." Naomi Carter's live stream comments surged wildly. "What does she mean by that? Yo? She's talking like she's important." "Plot twist incoming," Naomi whispered, barely containing her excitement. "Did you guys hear that? She said people who hold his future. What is going on?" Carla rolled her eyes. "Empty threats. She thinks she can scare us with big words." Amara finally reached down into her satchel. This time, there was no hesitation. Her fingers brushed the familiar leather of her folio, and she drew it out slowly, deliberately, laying it across her lap. The movement was graceful, measured, designed to hold attention. Alvarez frowned. "Ma'am, what is that?" Amara opened the folio with a soft snap. Inside, neatly arranged, were several documents and a sleek corporate identification badge edged in silver. She lifted the badge between two fingers, the cabin lights catching its gleam. Then she spoke clearly, her voice carrying across the cabin with the calm authority of someone who knew her words would change everything. "My name is Amara Johnson. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Aurora Air." The cabin erupted in gasps. Some passengers covered their mouths. Others leaned forward as though they had misheard. Naomi nearly dropped her phone before catching it again, her voice rising into a shriek. "Oh my God, did you hear that? She said she's the CEO of the airline. This is insane." Her viewers flooded the chat with disbelief and shock. Carla's laugh was brittle, forced. "You expect us to believe that sitting here dressed like that, pretending to be someone you're not?" Amara's eyes never wavered. "Pretending has never been my way. What I told you is fact, and you've just broadcast your actions against me. Live to tens of thousands of people." She turned her gaze toward Naomi, who was trembling with exhilaration. "Make sure they hear this clearly. The crew of this plane has attempted to remove its own CEO from her rightful seat." Stephen sputtered, his face flushing crimson. "This is ridiculous. There's no proof you're who you say you are." Without breaking eye contact, Amara tapped the badge against the seatback screen in front of her. The device chimed and immediately displayed her name, her title, her executive credentials linked directly to the airline's internal system. The technology had been installed months earlier at her order, though she had rarely needed to use it in public. Now, it was her undeniable signature. The cabin went silent again, but this silence was different. It was not the silence of anticipation or disbelief. It was the silence of reckoning. Alvarez stepped back, his eyes wide. He swallowed hard, his voice faltering. "She's telling the truth." Naomi gasped into her phone. She just proved it. She's the CEO. Oh my God, you guys, this is real. This is so real. I can't even breathe. Her viewer count exploded past 100,000. Carla's face drained of color. Her lips parted as though to speak, but no words came. She looked at Stephen, desperate for rescue. But Stephen's own eyes darted nervously. Captain Reed stood frozen, his authority suddenly meaningless. Amara leaned back in her seat, her voice calm, her presence commanding. "You asked me to move to economy. You tore my boarding pass. You struck me in front of witnesses. And now you want to tell me I don't belong here. Let me be clear. I don't just belong here. This is my airline. This is my plane. And you are standing here because I allowed you to serve it." The words hit like thunder. Passengers began murmuring louder, some nodding in awe, others shaking their heads at the absurdity of what they had just witnessed. The businessman in 2B, who had mocked her earlier, shifted uncomfortably, his arrogance collapsing under the weight of his mistake. Carla finally found her voice, though it quavered. "You could be lying. Maybe this is some kind of stunt." Amara turned the folio toward her, revealing documents stamped with the company seal, signed by the board. She let the bold header be visible, Chief Executive Officer, Aurora Air. Then she reached for her phone, dialed a number, and placed it on speaker. A calm, authoritative voice answered almost instantly. "Patricia Lee speaking." "Patricia," Amara said evenly, "I need you to listen carefully. I'm currently seated on Flight 728 Los Angeles to New York. Your senior flight attendant, your purser, and your captain attempted to remove me from first class. They tore my boarding pass. One of them struck me. The cabin erupted again." Patricia Lee's voice sharpened instantly. "What, Amara? Are you safe?" Amara's lips curved faintly. "I am safe. But we need to address what just happened. Not behind closed doors, but right here, where the world is already watching." Passengers stared, jaws slack. Naomi whispered into her phone. "She's on the phone with the chairwoman. You guys, this is next level. I can't even process this." Patricia's voice grew firm. "Put me on speaker for the entire cabin to hear." Amara tapped the button, and Patricia's voice filled the air. "This is Patricia Lee, chairwoman of Aurora Air. Every passenger on this flight is a witness to what just occurred. To the crew responsible, know this, your actions will have immediate consequences." Carla's knees seemed to weaken. Stephen wiped sweat from his forehead. Captain Reed's mouth opened, then closed again, his authority utterly stripped. Amara sat quietly, her dignity intact, her power revealed. For the first time since boarding, the balance of control had shifted entirely. She was no longer the target of suspicion, humiliation, and assault. She was the reckoning. Patricia Lee's voice echoed through the cabin speakers, steady and commanding. "This is not just a breach of professionalism. This is a violation of trust, of dignity, and of the very values this airline is built upon. Every passenger here is a witness to what has happened, and every phone raised in this cabin is a record we cannot erase. To the crew involved, you are hereby suspended from duty, effective immediately. The words landed like a gavel strike. Carla Monroe's eyes widened, her face blanching as though the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Stephen Clark stumbled back a step, muttering incoherently. Captain Thomas Reed clenched his jaw. His hands balled into fists at his sides. The authority that once clung to his uniform had evaporated. Naomi Carter gasped into her phone, her live-stream audience exploding with comments that blurred across her screen. "Did you guys hear that? Suspended on the spot. This is insane. This is history." Her voice trembled with adrenaline. Patricia continued, her voice sharper now. "Captain Reed, you failed in your duty to uphold fairness and safety in your cabin. You prioritized convenience over justice, schedule over humanity. You will step aside immediately. A replacement crew will be dispatched to continue this flight once order has been restored. Officer Alvarez, you are to ensure compliance and report directly to headquarters." Gasps swept the cabin again. The passengers, who had once murmured cruel assumptions, now sat stunned, watching history unfold a few feet away. The businessman in 2B who had mocked Amara earlier shrank in his seat, avoiding her gaze. The woman behind him whispered, "I can't believe what I'm seeing. She's really the CEO." Carla's voice cracked as she tried to protest. "You can't do this. Not like this. Not in front of passengers. It'll ruin me." Amara finally spoke, her voice calm, even compassionate despite the humiliation she had endured. "You ruined yourself. Carla, every decision you made, every word you spoke, every slap you delivered, it was yours. I gave you every chance to choose differently. You chose this." Carla's knees buckled slightly, and she gripped the seat back to steady herself. Her eyes darted around the cabin, searching for support, but found only cold stares and raised phones. Stephen cleared his throat, his tone desperate. "This isn't fair. We didn't know who you were. If we had known Amara's gaze sharpened, that is exactly the problem. You should not treat anyone differently because of who they are, what they wear, or how you perceive them. Respect is not reserved for titles. Dignity is not conditional. If you had known I was the CEO, you would have behaved, and that reveals everything." Her words reverberated through the cabin, silencing even the faintest whispers. For the first time, Naomi lowered her phone slightly, her eyes glistening. Her voice trembled when she spoke into her live stream. "She's right. Oh my God, she's right." Patricia's voice returned, colder now. "This flight will remain grounded until replacements are dispatched. In the meantime, every passenger here will be offered accommodations and full compensation for the disruption. What they have witnessed tonight will be addressed publicly, not hidden behind closed doors. Amara, you have my full support. Handle this as you see fit." The line clicked off, leaving the cabin in a silence so thick it pressed against the skin. Amara exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of control settle firmly in her hands. She rose to her feet, the red mark on her cheek still visible, but her presence radiating calm authority. Every eye followed her as she stepped into the aisle. "I want you all to remember what you witnessed here," she said, her voice gentle but commanding. "Not because it happened to me, but because it could happen to anyone. Dignity should not be a privilege. It is a right." And when it is violated, it poisons more than one seat on one plane. It poisons the soul of the system itself. Passengers nodded, some murmuring words of agreement. Phones captured her every word, ensuring they would echo across the internet before the plane even left the ground. Officer Alvarez shifted uneasily. "Ma'am, CEO Johnson, what do you want me to do with them?" He gestured toward Carla, Stephen, and Captain Reed. Amara studied the three of them. Carla's shoulders slumped, her eyes wet but defiant. Stephen's face glistened with sweat, his pride shattered. Captain Reed still stood tall, though the rigidity in his posture was more fear than confidence. "You will escort them off this plane," Amara said quietly. "They will not operate another flight until they have faced a full investigation. And, whatever the outcome, they will not be permitted to hide what happened here. The world already knows." Alvarez nodded slowly, his respect for her plain in his eyes. Understood. As he stepped forward, Carla whispered hoarsely, "Please, I have children. I can't lose everything." Amara's gaze softened just slightly. "Then you should have thought of them before striking another human being. Real change begins when we stop excusing cruelty with fear of consequence." Carla's lips trembled, but she said nothing more. Passengers watched as Alvarez guided the disgraced crew toward the door. Every step they took was captured on phones, every bowed head a silent confession. The once powerful figures of authority now looked small, diminished in the glow of the cabin lights. Naomi turned her camera back on herself briefly, her expression a mix of awe and guilt. "I don't even know what to say anymore. I thought this was just drama, but it's real. It's bigger than me. It's bigger than all of us." Her viewers filled the chat with words like justice, powerful, history in the making. Amara returned to her seat in 2A. She lowered herself gently, her body heavy with the weight of what had just unfolded. Her mind spun with the enormity of it, but her heart felt a calm resolve. She had chosen patience, and patience had revealed the truth in its full, undeniable light. The red mark on her cheek still burned, but now it felt less like a wound and more like a scar already healing, a symbol of resilience. The passengers sat in silence, processing. Some had been complicit with their silence. Some had jeered. Some had mocked. Now they shifted uncomfortably, confronted by their own choices. Amara could see it in their faces, the reflection of shame, the realization of how quickly they had judged. In that moment, she knew the reckoning was not just for the crew, it was for everyone in that cabin. Perhaps everyone who would see the videos rippling across the internet. She closed her eyes briefly, whispering the words her father had once told her, "Never let them see you break. Dignity is your armor. It cannot be taken unless you surrender it." And she had not surrendered. The cabin felt heavier now that the disgraced crew had been escorted out. The wide seats and soft lighting no longer gave the illusion of luxury, but instead of a courtroom where judgment had just been delivered, every passenger shifted in their seats, carrying the weight of what they had witnessed. The hush that followed was not the comfortable silence of a flight about to depart, but the unsettled quiet of reflection. Amara Johnson sat in 2A, her back straight, her eyes gazing out the window at the airport tarmac. The streaks of fading daylight cast long golden bands across the wing. Her cheek still throbbed faintly from Carla's slap, yet she refused to raise her hand to it. To acknowledge the pain physically would be to give it more power than it deserved. Instead, she let it live quietly, a reminder that even scars could become fuel for change. Naomi Carter lowered her phone for the first time in nearly an hour. The glowing screen went dark in her lap. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. For the first time since she had pressed record, she felt ashamed. The rush of likes, the surge of comments, the thrill of going viral, all of it now seemed hollow. She had fed her audience the humiliation of another human being, mistaking pain for entertainment. She glanced toward Amara, her chest tightening. "Ma'am," Naomi said softly, almost a whisper. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have streamed it like that. I didn't understand." Amara turned her head slowly, her gaze steady but not cruel. "You understood enough to know it would get you attention, but perhaps now you'll use that attention to tell the truth, not just chase spectacle." Naomi's eyes brimmed with tears. "I will. I promise." Other passengers began to stir, the silence loosening into murmurs. The businessman in 2B cleared his throat awkwardly. I judged you before I knew who you were. I said things I shouldn't have." His voice faltered, the arrogance that once clung to him now replaced with the frailty of guilt. Amara studied him for a moment, then replied softly, "You don't owe me an apology because I'm the CEO. You owe it to yourself for failing to see another human being clearly. That failure costs us all." The man nodded, his face flushed with shame. His wife dabbed her eyes with a tissue, whispering, "She's right." Across the aisle, a middle-aged woman raised her voice. "I recorded what happened, not for spectacle, but because I knew it was wrong. If you want, I'll share it with your office, so you have the full evidence." Amara inclined her head gratefully. "Thank you. Truth matters most when it is undeniable." The murmur of agreement rippled through the cabin. Some passengers nodded, others shifted in discomfort, but all of them knew they had been changed. They had been part of something bigger than a delayed flight. They had witnessed cruelty unmasked, authority stripped, dignity reclaimed. Officer Miguel Alvarez returned from the front of the plane, his expression solemn. He paused near Amara's seat, lowering his voice. "The replacements are on their way. Another captain, another purser, a new senior attendant. They'll arrive within the hour." He hesitated, then added, "I've been in law enforcement for 12 years. I've seen a lot, but I've never seen someone stand as calm as you did. Most people would have broken." Amara's lips curved faintly. "Calm doesn't mean I wasn't burning inside. It means I refused to let them own that fire. Sometimes restraint is the loudest form of resistance." Alvarez nodded slowly. "I'll remember that." Time stretched in the cabin as passengers settled back, waiting for the replacement crew. Some browsed their phones, reading the eruption of headlines already spreading online. News outlets had begun to pick up Naomi's live stream, and clips of Carla tearing the ticket, slapping Amara, and being suspended on the spot were circulating at lightning speed. Hashtags multiplied by the minute. The story had already left the plane. It was spilling into the world. Amara knew the storm had only begun. The public would demand answers. Investors would call. Regulators would take notice. But, more importantly, people who had lived through similar humiliations would finally see their pain mirrored in a story too visible to deny. That was what mattered most. Naomi hesitated again, her voice trembling. "What will happen to them, Carla?" "Stephen." The captain, Amara's eyes softened, but her tone remained firm. "They will face accountability. Not vengeance, but accountability. They'll have the chance to reflect, to change if they are willing. But their actions cannot be erased, and the consequences cannot be avoided. Naomi bit her lip. Do you believe people like that can change? Amara turned her gaze back to the window, the fading sun painting the clouds in shades of pink and gold. I believe people can change when they face themselves honestly. But change doesn't erase the harm already done. It only prevents more harm in the future. That's why accountability matters. The cabin door opened quietly, and a new group of crew members entered. Their uniforms were crisp, their postures professional but not rigid. Leading them was Captain Elena Morales, her presence steady and reassuring. She carried herself with quiet confidence, her dark hair pulled neatly into a bun, her eyes calm but observant. She walked straight to Amara, extending a hand. Ms. Johnson, I've been briefed. On behalf of those of us taking over, I want to say how deeply sorry I am for what you endured. It will not happen again on my watch. Amara stood and shook her hand firmly. Thank you, Captain. This flight deserves to be about safety and respect, not spectacle. The replacement purser, a man named David Kim, addressed the cabin with a respectful bow of his head. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the disruption. We will be departing shortly. Please know that your voices matter, and what you've witnessed will not be ignored. Passengers clapped softly, some out of relief, others out of solidarity. Amara returned to her seat, exhaling quietly. She knew the journey ahead would be long, not just the hours to New York, but the days and months of rebuilding trust. Still, she felt a deep calm. The truth had been exposed, and with it came the possibility of real change. As the plane finally began to push back from the gate, Naomi lifted her phone again, but this time her tone was different. We're about to take off now. I started this stream thinking it was just drama. But what I saw changed me. I saw how quick we are to judge, how easy it is to ignore someone's dignity. I hope all of you watching think about that before you speak, before you post, before you act, because it matters. It really matters. Her viewers flooded the comments with words of support, reflection, even apology. The spectacle had become a lesson, and the lesson was spreading. Amara closed her eyes as the plane rumbled forward, whispering to herself once more, "Dignity cannot be taken unless you surrender it." She felt the truth of it settle deep in her bones. She had not surrendered, and because of that, perhaps others would find the strength not to surrender either. The aircraft lifted from the runway with a shudder, then settled into its smooth ascent. Outside the window, Los Angeles shrank into a patchwork of glowing streets and fading coastline. Inside the cabin, the silence was thick but no longer hostile. It was the silence of reflection, of passengers carrying the heavy weight of what they had just witnessed. Amara Johnson leaned back in seat 2A, her hands resting lightly on the armrest. The soft rumble of the engines was almost soothing, a reminder that even after the storm, life pressed forward. Yet her mind was far from quiet. She could still feel the echo of Carla Monroe's hand across her cheek, the sting of torn paper, the sting of disbelief turned humiliation. Those moments would not vanish easily, not for her and not for anyone who had seen them. But beneath the pain, there was clarity. This was no longer just about one flight, one slap, one act of cruelty. This was about an entire system that had allowed such behavior to take root. And now, Thanks to dozens of raised phones and one relentless live stream, the system could no longer pretend ignorance. Naomi Carter sat 2 rows back, her phone still in her hand, though she had stopped streaming for the moment. Her eyes were swollen, her lips pressed tight as though she were holding back 1,000 apologies. She stared at Amara with the weight of guilt, but also with something new respect. The businessman in 2B sat stiffly, his head bowed. He had not spoken since his awkward attempt at an apology. His wife occasionally glanced toward Amara, her eyes shimmering with tears she did not bother to wipe away. Officer Miguel Alvarez had taken a seat near the galley, his posture tense, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. He stared at the floor as if replaying every moment, every hesitation, every order he had nearly followed without question. Captain Elena Morales' voice came over the intercom, warm and steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are now climbing through 25,000 feet. Estimated flight time to New York is 4 hours and 30 minutes. Please relax and enjoy the journey." Her words carried none of the arrogance of the man she had replaced. They were simple, professional, humane. Amara closed her eyes briefly, listening to the hum of the engines. For the first time that day, she allowed herself a moment of stillness. But her stillness was not empty. It was full of thought. How would she respond when the world demanded answers? What message would she deliver when the cameras turned to her? Would she pursue punishment alone? Or would she seek something larger, something transformative? Her inner voice, steady and familiar, whispered again, "Dignity is not revenge, it is responsibility." The curtain at the front of the cabin rustled, and David Kim, the replacement purser, approached quietly. His voice was soft, respectful. "Ms. Johnson, would you like something to eat or drink? I understand you may not feel like it, but I'd like to offer—" Amara looked up at him, her eyes kind. "Thank you. David. Tea. Please, chamomile, if you have it." He nodded and disappeared to prepare it. When he returned moments later, he set the cup gently on her tray, bowing his head slightly. "For what it's worth, I'm honored to serve you, not because of your title, but because of the strength you showed today. It reminded me why respect must be at the heart of this job." Amara's lips curved faintly. Hold on to that. Too many forget. As she sipped the tea, warm and calming, she felt the eyes of the cabin return to her. Passengers had seen her humiliated, then seen her reveal her power. Now, they wanted to see what she would do with it. Would she condemn? Would she forgive? Would she lead? Naomi finally rose from her seat, her steps hesitant as she approached. She stopped beside Amara, her voice low. May I sit for a moment?" Amara gestured to the empty seat across the aisle. "Of course." Naomi sank into it, clutching her phone tightly. Her hands trembled. "I need to say something. When I started streaming, I thought it was just entertainment. I thought people wanted drama. I didn't realize I was turning someone's pain into a spectacle. That wasn't fair to you." Amara studied her carefully. "Why did you stop streaming?" Naomi's voice cracked. "Because I finally saw you. Not just a passenger being harassed. I saw a human being, and I saw myself, chasing clicks while someone else was hurting. It made me sick." Amara leaned forward slightly, her tone soft but firm. "Then learn from it. You have an audience that listens to you. Use that voice to teach them what dignity looks like, what respect feels like. Don't waste this moment." Naomi's eyes filled with tears. "I will. I promise I will." The businessman in 2B spoke suddenly, his voice thick. "She's right, young lady. We all failed here today. We saw it happening and said nothing, or worse, joined in. We thought we were protecting order, but really, we were protecting cruelty." Amara turned her gaze to him. "The measure of a person isn't whether they make mistakes. It's what they choose to do once they see them. That's when character is revealed." The man nodded slowly, his wife pressing a hand to his arm. The plane continued to climb, the cabin lights dimming as the sky outside deepened to indigo. Passengers settled into a fragile peace, though none of them would forget the turbulence that had already defined this flight. Amara set her empty teacup aside and reached for her phone. She typed a quick message to Patricia Lee. "We will need a public statement before we land. Not just an apology reforms, real, measurable, enforceable reforms." Her finger hovered before sending. Then she added one more line. "This is bigger than us." She pressed send, knowing the next hours would set the tone for years to come. As the engines hummed and the plane pierced through the darkening sky, Amara allowed herself one last thought before resting her eyes. Power was never about the seat you occupied. It was about how you used it once the world was watching. And tonight, the world was watching. At 30,000 feet, the cabin had settled into an uneasy calm. The hum of the engines was steady, but beneath it, every passenger carried the aftershocks of what had unfolded. Some scrolled through their phones, already seeing headlines explode across news feeds: CEO humiliated on her own airline. Others sat in silence, their eyes darting occasionally toward Amara Johnson in 2A, as though she were both witness and judge to their complicity. Amara leaned her head back, her eyes closed, though sleep was impossible. She could feel the vibrations of the jet beneath her, the whisper of altitude pressing against the fuselage. Yet her mind was sharp, restless, charting the ripples of consequence that would spread once they landed. This was no longer a private humiliation. It was a public reckoning. She had revealed herself, not just to those in the cabin, but to the world beyond it. Now, she needed to decide what came next. Her phone buzzed on the tray table. A message from Patricia Lee appeared. Crisis team mobilized. Press requests flooding in. Investors calling. "We need your directive," Amara typed back slowly, each word deliberate. "No spin, no damage control, truth only. This isn't about protecting image, it's about protecting dignity." She set the phone aside and exhaled. Her thoughts returned to her father, the man who had taught her that dignity was both shield and sword. He had told her once, when she was a child facing cruel words on a school bus, "Never fight their fire with fire. Let their fire burn itself out. Then plant something new in the ashes." She clung to that wisdom now. Naomi Carter, 2 rows back, had begun quietly recording a video of her own, not live streaming but speaking directly to her audience in a calmer, more reflective tone. Her voice carried just enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I thought I was capturing drama, but what I really captured was cruelty, and I was part of it. I didn't help, I didn't speak up, I just fed the fire. I want to say to everyone watching later, don't be like me. Be braver. See people clearly before it's too late." Her eyes glistened as she ended the recording. Amara opened her eyes and looked toward Naomi. Their gazes met, and, for the first time, Naomi didn't flinch. She nodded once, a small gesture of acknowledgement, of accountability. Amara inclined her head in return. Officer Miguel Alvarez shifted in his seat by the galley. He looked restless, as though replaying every second of his hesitation, the weight of orders versus conscience. At last, he rose and approached Amara's seat. He spoke low, his tone heavy. "I want you to know something. When the captain ordered me to remove you, part of me wanted to follow protocol. That's what I've always done. But something in me hesitated, and now I see why. If I had dragged you out of this cabin, I don't think I could have lived with myself." Amara studied him quietly. The hardest battles are the ones between conscience and command. You chose hesitation over blind obedience. That hesitation gave me the space to reveal the truth. Sometimes restraint is courage. His shoulders relaxed slightly, though his eyes remained clouded. "I'll remember that. I'll do better." The businessman in 2B, who had been silent for most of the flight, finally spoke again. His voice was rough, stripped of its earlier arrogance. "Ms. Johnson, my children are about your age when you first started your career. I keep thinking what they would have felt if they had been in your seat. I can't escape the shame of how I judged you." He paused, swallowing hard. "If you're willing, I want to help however I can, to be better than I was today." Amara regarded him with steady eyes. "Words are easy at 30,000 feet. Change is harder when you're back on the ground. Let your children see you choose differently, not just say differently." The man nodded, his wife squeezing his hand tightly. The cabin lights dimmed further as night took hold outside. The stars stretched across the sky like silent witnesses, infinite and unblinking. The plane hummed through the darkness, carrying with it a story that had already escaped its metal walls. Amara's phone buzzed again. This time it was a news alert. Viral video: flight attendant slaps passenger reveals she's airline CEO. It had already been shared millions of times. Comments flooded social media. Voices of outrage, disbelief, solidarity. Some told their own stories of discrimination on planes, in hotels, in restaurants. Hashtags multiplied, binding strangers together across continents. Amara scrolled briefly, then set the phone down. The world was watching, yes, but the world also had a short memory. Outrage would trend for a week, maybe 2. The real challenge was turning outrage into reform, fleeting shock into lasting change. She leaned back, closing her eyes again, whispering softly so only she could hear. "This isn't about me. It's about what must come after me." The engines roared softly as the plane cruised over the Midwest. Passengers dozed fitfully, though their sleep was restless. Naomi sat upright, scribbling notes into her phone, determined to capture her own transformation. Alvarez stared out the window, lost in thought. The businessman clutched his wife's hand, perhaps for comfort, perhaps for absolution. Amara sat silently, her mind crafting what the world would need to hear once they landed. Not a speech of anger, not a call for vengeance, but a blueprint. She imagined a system where no one could be silenced, where accountability was immediate, where bias was exposed in real time. She thought of contracts rewritten, training reshaped, technology deployed for transparency instead of profit. The outlines of reform began to crystallize in her mind. She knew it would not be easy. Resistance would come from unions, from executives, from those who profited off silence. But she had endured worse storms than this. She had faced rooms full of men who doubted her, contracts designed to exclude her, systems that fought against her very presence, and each time she had turned those obstacles into fuel. Now, the humiliation of one flight would become the seed of transformation. As the night deepened and the cabin grew quiet, Amara whispered once more to herself, almost like a prayer, "Dignity cannot be taken unless you surrender it." And tonight, I did not surrender. The plane pressed eastward through the dark sky, carrying her not just toward New York, but toward the next battle, the next reckoning, the next chance to carve dignity into the foundation of an industry that had too often forgotten it. The hours passed with the steady hum of engines carrying the plane eastward through the night sky. New York City waited ahead, its skyline glittering like a constellation anchored to the earth. But inside the cabin of Flight 728, the passengers sat restless, each person wrapped in private reflection. The air carried a different weight now, not of hostility, but of anticipation. Everyone knew that the landing would not mark the end of this story. It would mark its beginning. Amara Johnson remained in seat 2A, her posture composed, her expression unreadable. Her cheek still bore the faint shadow of Carla Monroe's hand, but she did not touch it. To her, it was no longer a mark of humiliation, it was proof. Proof of how quickly dignity could be attacked, proof of how deeply bias could fester even in places meant to be safe. Her phone buzzed again. Patricia Lee's name glowed on the screen. Amara answered quietly, her voice low. Patricia's tone was clipped but urgent. "We're preparing statements for when you land. The media is already swarming JFK. This has gone global. Amara, Europe's morning news shows are covering it. Asia's already awake. Investors are shaken. We need your words before this spins beyond us." Amara's voice was calm. "There will be no spin, Patricia, no carefully crafted damage control. If the world is watching, then they will see the truth, not a version polished for comfort. I'll speak when we land, but I'll speak my way." Patricia hesitated. "You know they'll push back. Shareholders will panic." Amara's lips curved faintly. "Let them. A system built on dignity will always outlast a system built on denial." She ended the call and set the phone aside. Around her, the cabin remained hushed. Naomi Carter had fallen into a fitful sleep, her phone clutched in her hands like an anchor. Officer Miguel Alvarez sat near the galley, staring out into the darkness, his thoughts a storm he couldn't escape. The businessman in 2B held his wife's hand tightly, as though afraid to let go, his eyes darting occasionally toward Amara with a mixture of shame and respect. The intercom crackled softly. Captain Elena Morales' voice carried over the speakers, steady and reassuring. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into New York. Please fasten your seatbelts and prepare for landing." The cabin lights brightened slightly. Passengers straightened in their seats, adjusting belts, tucking away loose items, but none of the usual small talk filled the air. There was no chatter about hotel plans, no murmurs about weather, only silence. They all knew what waited below. Amara looked out the window. The first hints of city light twinkled far in the distance, stretching like a golden net across the earth. Her reflection in the glass stared back at her, eyes calm but burning with quiet intensity. She thought of her father's words again, words that had carried her through boardrooms, courtrooms, and now an airplane cabin turned battlefield. Never let them see you break. Her phone buzzed once more, this time with a flood of notifications. News anchors speculated wildly. Opinion pieces emerged before the plane had even touched down. Headlines screamed across the screen, airline CEO humiliated on her own flight. Passenger live stream sparks. Global outrage. Questions rose too. What reforms would follow? What accountability would come? Would this be another story that faded, or would it spark something larger? Amara closed her eyes briefly. The choice was hers now. She could let this become a scandal, or she could forge it into a movement. The descent grew bumpier, light turbulence rocking the cabin gently. Some passengers gripped their armrests, but Amara remained still, her gaze fixed outward. The city was closer now, its lights glowing brighter, its edges sharper. Naomi stirred awake, blinking blearily. She looked around, then locked eyes with Amara. Her lips parted as though to speak, but no words came. Instead, she simply mouthed, "Thank you." Amara nodded once in return. The plane broke through the final layer of clouds, the city sprawling below like a living organism of light. The engines whined softly as the landing gear lowered with a muted thud. The runway lights stretched ahead, a path into chaos and clarity. The cabin tensed. Everyone knew that when the doors opened, the sanctuary of altitude would end. The world would pour in. Cameras would flash. Microphones would thrust forward. Questions would sting sharper than turbulence. Amara inhaled slowly, steadying herself. This was not the first time she had walked into a storm, but it was the first time the storm had been born at 30,000 feet, in a cabin meant for comfort, but twisted into a stage of humiliation and defiance. The wheels screeched against the runway, the plane shuddering as it slowed. Passengers exhaled collectively, some in relief, some in dread. The engines roared down, then softened, guiding the aircraft toward its gate. Amara sat still, her hands folded neatly. She knew she would not leave through a private exit. She would walk out through the same door every passenger used. To hide would be to surrender, and surrender was not in her nature. The plane rolled to a stop. The chime sounded, releasing seat belts. Passengers remained seated, unusually obedient, waiting. The tension was electric. Amara rose from her seat slowly, her posture regal, her movements deliberate. She reached for her satchel, slipping the leather strap over her shoulder. She did not glance at the mirror to check the mark on her cheek. It no longer mattered. Captain Morales appeared from the cockpit, her face composed. "Ms. Johnson, there's a crowd waiting, media, officials, airport staff. Do you want me to arrange a secure exit?" Amara shook her head gently. "No, I'll face them." The captain nodded respectfully. Stepping aside, Amara walked down the aisle, the eyes of every passenger following her. Some whispered words of thanks, others simply nodded, as though acknowledging they had witnessed something greater than themselves. Naomi lifted her phone again, this time not to chase spectacle, but to document history. The cabin door opened with a hiss. A flood of light and noise poured in from the jet bridge. Shouts from reporters echoed faintly, the flashes of cameras sparking like distant lightning. Amara paused at the threshold, inhaling deeply. She whispered to herself, a vow only she could hear. This ends tonight, but it begins tomorrow. And then she stepped forward into the storm. The jet bridge opened to chaos. Even before Amara Johnson stepped into view, she could hear the swarm reporters shouting her name, cameras flashing like lightning, microphones jostling for position. The hum of the aircraft had been replaced by the roar of the world outside, hungry for answers. Amara walked steadily, her satchel over her shoulder, her face calm. Behind her, Captain Elena Morales and Purser David Kim flanked her quietly, not as guards, but as silent witnesses. Officer Miguel Alvarez lingered a step back, his hand hovering near his belt, uncertain whether he was protecting her or being protected by her. The first flashbulbs hit her eyes, and she did not flinch. She had been here before corporate acquisitions, shareholder rebellions, Senate hearings. But this was different. This was not about contracts or politics. This was about the most basic of human rights, the right to dignity, played out in the cruelest of theaters, a crowded plane. Questions erupted in a barrage. Ms. Johnson, is it true you were assaulted by your own flight attendant? Will the crew be fired? Are you stepping down as CEO? What reforms will you announce? Amara raised her hand once, a quiet gesture. The noise softened, though flashes continued to spark. She stood before them, the faint mark still visible on her cheek. Her voice, when it came, was measured and resonant, carrying through the din without strain. Yes, she began. What you've heard is true. I was struck by a member of my own crew. I was humiliated, my boarding pass destroyed, and my dignity questioned. And I was not the only victim tonight. Every passenger in that cabin was a witness to cruelty, to bias, to the dangerous belief that some lives carry more worth than others. The crowd hushed further, leaning in. Amara continued. But let me be clear, this is not just my story. This is the story of every person who has been judged for the color of their skin, the sound of their voice, the clothes they wear. This is about a system that allows prejudice to masquerade as procedure, that rewards silence more than it values courage. Tonight, the world saw what happens when that system collides with truth. A murmur ran through the crowd, reporters scribbling furiously. Naomi Carter's live stream from inside the cabin had already gone viral, and now her phone was raised again from somewhere behind the cameras, broadcasting Amara's words live to millions. I will not hide what happened, Amara said, her gaze sweeping the press. There will be no spin, no corporate excuses. The individuals responsible have been suspended, and a full investigation is underway. But punishment alone is not enough. We must change the system that allowed this to happen. She paused, her voice softening just slightly, enough to let the humanity in. I built my career on the belief that dignity is not optional. Tonight reminded me how fragile dignity can be when left unguarded. That ends now. Aurora Air will implement sweeping reforms, transparent accountability, mandatory bias training, real-time reporting for every incident. No complaint will disappear into silence again. Reporters shouted over one another for follow-up questions. Will you press charges? Are you considering resignation? How will investors respond? Amara held her ground, her tone unwavering. I will not step down. I will not walk away. Leadership is not about avoiding storms. It is about walking into them. I will press charges if necessary. But more importantly, I will press for change. Investors should know this: a company that protects dignity will always be worth more than one that protects appearances. Behind the cameras, passengers who had disembarked lingered near the edges of the crowd. The businessman from 2B stood with his wife, their faces pale but intent. Naomi Carter pushed through the throng, her phone still raised. When she finally reached Amara's side, she whispered into the microphone, "You're seeing this live. The CEO herself. No PR filter, just truth." Amara placed a hand gently on Naomi's shoulder, acknowledging her without breaking stride. The young influencer's eyes glistened, and she nodded silently, her audience watching her own transformation in real time. A reporter shouted sharply, "Ms. Johnson, some critics say this is all a publicity stunt, that you staged this to draw attention to yourself. How do you respond?" Amara turned toward the question, her eyes steady. "If you believe anyone would choose to be slapped, humiliated, and doubted in front of millions for the sake of publicity, then you misunderstand the cost of pain. This was not staged. This was lived, and it is lived every day by people with less power, less visibility, and fewer chances to be believed. If my pain forces the world to see theirs, then I will carry it openly." Her words struck like a hammer, and for a moment the shouting stopped. The crowd stood frozen, the only sound the clicking of cameras. Patricia Lee appeared at the edge of the jet bridge, her expression taut but resolute. She joined Amara, nodding slightly. Together, they faced the press, two women holding the weight of a global company but refusing to hide behind polished statements. Amara spoke once more, her voice rising above the hum. "Tonight is not the end of a story. It is the beginning of one. And I promise you, this Aurora Air will not be remembered for humiliation. It will be remembered for transformation." With that, she turned, guiding her small entourage toward the waiting convoy of black cars outside. The crowd erupted again, but Amara did not look back. The path ahead was already clear in her mind, even if it was steep and jagged. As the car door closed behind her, she allowed herself a single deep breath. The storm had broken, but the rebuilding was just beginning. The black convoy moved swiftly through the midnight streets of New York City, lights reflecting off the wet pavement. Inside the lead car, Amara Johnson sat in silence, the city's pulse beating against the windows. Patricia Lee sat across from her, her phone buzzing relentlessly with calls from board members and journalists. Amara ignored the noise. Her thoughts turned inward. The events of the night replayed in fragments: the tearing of the ticket, the slap, the passenger's silence, the revelation of her identity. Each moment felt sharp, unforgettable. Yet what lingered most was not the pain, but the clarity. She had seen with her own eyes how fragile dignity could be when placed in the hands of people unwilling to protect it. Now, she was determined to build something stronger, something that could not be torn apart so easily. When the convoy pulled into Aurora Air's Manhattan headquarters, reporters were already waiting, though the crowd was smaller than at JFK. Security cleared a path, but Amara refused to rush. She walked calmly into the building, every step deliberate. Cameras captured her composure, her steady gaze, her refusal to hide. Inside, the boardroom lights burned bright. Executives and advisors filled the long table, their faces drawn with tension. Some looked defensive, others guilty, a few quietly relieved to see her. Patricia took her seat at the far end, but Amara remained standing at the head of the table. "I will not waste time," she began, her voice carrying across the room. "What happened tonight is unacceptable. Not just the slap, not just the humiliation, but the culture that allowed it to happen. This company has failed to protect the dignity of its passengers and crew. That failure ends now." She placed her hands firmly on the table. "From this moment forward, Aurora Air will adopt a new standard. Every flight will have real-time incident reporting available to both passengers and crew. Complaints will bypass layers of bureaucracy and go straight to an independent review board. Every staff member, from executives to ground crew, will undergo mandatory bias and de-escalation training. There will be no exceptions. A murmur rippled through the room. One executive shifted uncomfortably. Amara, these changes will cost millions. Investors will balk. The unions Amara cut him off with a single raised hand. Silence costs more. Denial costs more. Every viral video, every lawsuit, every broken life we ignore costs more than any training program. We don't just sell tickets, we sell trust. And if we cannot guarantee dignity, we have nothing worth selling. The room fell silent. Patricia's eyes gleamed with approval, though she said nothing, allowing Amara's words to stand unchallenged. Amara straightened. Tomorrow morning, we will hold a press conference. We will not issue a statement crafted by lawyers. We will stand before the world and admit our failure, and then we will tell them exactly how we intend to change. Not in vague promises, but in measurable actions. We will create a new protocol for dignity in air travel, and it will carry my name if necessary. Let it be a reminder of what we stand for. Her voice softened then, though it carried no less weight. We cannot erase what happened tonight, but we can make sure it never happens again. And if we succeed, this company will not only recover, it will lead. The executives lowered their eyes, some in shame, others in reluctant agreement. None dared oppose her. The truth was too raw, too undeniable. Later, in the quiet of her office, Amara stood by the window overlooking the glittering skyline. She let the silence wrap around her, the storm outside now replaced with stillness. She thought again of her father, of his lesson on dignity as armor. Tonight, that armor had been tested and had not broken. She had not surrendered. A soft knock came at the door. Naomi Carter stepped inside, her face hesitant but determined. She held up her phone. I know it's late, but I wanted you to see this. My video, not the live stream, the one I recorded after. I told my audience what I learned tonight. I told them how I failed, how I judged, how I turned pain into spectacle. I thought they'd hate me for it, but they thanked me. They said it made them look at themselves. They said they'll do better. Her voice trembled. I wanted you to know that your strength didn't just change me, it's already changing others. Amara regarded her quietly, then nodded. That's how change begins, not with perfection, but with honesty. Naomi's eyes filled with tears. Thank you for not giving up on us, even when we didn't deserve it. Amara allowed a small, genuine smile. Don't thank me. Thank the truth. It has a way of breaking through, no matter how hard people try to silence it. The young woman left, and Amara turned back to the city. For the first time that night, she felt the weight lift slightly from her shoulders. She knew the road ahead would be difficult. There would be resistance, lawsuits, backlash. But she also knew that a movement had begun. The passengers on that flight would tell their stories. The world would demand accountability, and she would be ready to lead. As dawn broke over Manhattan, the first headlines of the new day spread across the globe. Aurora Air CEO calls for dignity standard in aviation. Viral flight sparks, industry-wide reckoning. A movement takes off. Amara sipped her coffee. The city bathed in golden light outside her window. She whispered once more, to herself and to the memory of her father's wisdom. Dignity cannot be taken unless you surrender it, and I will never surrender. The world was watching. And this time, she would make sure it never looked away. Sometimes the greatest battles don't happen in courtrooms or boardrooms. They happen in the narrow aisles of an airplane, where prejudice hides behind uniforms and procedures. Amara Johnson's story reminds us that dignity is fragile when left undefended, but unbreakable when claimed with courage. What began as an act of cruelty became a turning point, not just for one woman, but for an entire industry forced to confront its reflection. As passengers, many of us have seen moments of unfairness and looked away. Tonight, we were invited to ask ourselves, what would I have done? Would I have spoken up? Would I have stood beside her? These questions are uncomfortable, but they are necessary, because change begins not only with leaders like Amara, but with ordinary witnesses who choose truth over silence. Let this story stay with you not as entertainment, but as a reminder that every ticket carries not just a seat, but a promise of respect, and that promise must never be broken. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Together, let's build a community that refuses to accept discrimination and stands for dignity in every corner of life.